Hi, I'm Patric Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background is that Favro customers are enterprises that want to be more agile, software as a service companies that want to have more flat organizations while they grow, and game developers and publishers that want to keep their marketing and product and operations in sync when they ship on a weekly basis. So we get to know some truly inspiring leaders, and we interview them in this podcast so we can all learn from them. Let's go. And we are live with Markus Halttunen. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Patrick.
All right, cool. So I think that a lot of people recognize the success of Small Giant Games. And you being one of the founders and CTO through this journey, I think it would be super cool to just hear your story, leading up to what you do today.
Yeah, I've been doing software development professionally for over 20 years, probably since the start of 2000. And in 2004, I joined this company called Sulake as a senior software developer. And most people probably don't know Sulake, but they might know this product called Habbo Hotel, which was this virtual world for teenagers. And over there, I took on more and more leadership responsibility over the years, and eventually I was the CTO there for about 1.5 years. And even though Habbo Hotel was very successful in its heyday, it was not doing that well for many years. So near the end of 2012, we had to let go a large number of people again, and I was asking myself, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? And the answer was no. So although Sulake was a great learning experience on what works, and even more importantly, what doesn't work, it was my time to figure out something else. And that kind of took me to Small Giant. So in the beginning of 2013, one of my colleagues from Sulake, Otto Nieminen, contacted me, and he suggested founding a gaming company together. And it just felt like an opportunity that I didn't want to miss. So we were joined by two very talented graphics designers, Tommi Vallista and Ilkka Juopperi, and pretty soon also Timo Soininen, who used to be the CEO at Sulake in the early days. So, and that's how how we got started with this awesome story.
Sweden, where I'm from, there's for sure quite a lot of success stories around game studios, but Finland is extraordinary. And I think when you are in the industry and you meet people around the world, it's not seldom that you meet someone who's Finnish. I think, where in the world are you right now, actually?
I'm actually in Finland. So I was visiting the US for about 4 months, but now back here in Finland.
So you're spreading a little bit of that, Finnish culture to the Bay Area. So speaking about culture, then, a lot of people that I had on this podcast, when they're talking about the success of the studio, very often, one way or the other, it will come down to how they talk about culture. And I think this is a very interesting topic here for today. And I know that you've been thinking this through a bit and kind of broken it down. So let's get into your thoughts around building that success culture at Small Giant Games, because I think we can all learn from it.
I'm wondering, maybe it makes sense for me to tell a little bit, it doesn't answer directly your question right now, but just a little bit background still about what we did at Small Giant and how we got to where we are right now, and then I could answer some questions about the culture. So one of the first games our first game was called Oddwings Escape, which was this beautiful flying game. It gained a lot of positive visibility, but it had a bunch of conceptual issues. Most importantly, it didn't monetize pretty much at all. And our biggest mistake there was that we developed it for far too long before getting it in front of actual people. And but we took a lot of learnings from that. I think one key aspect, which I'm going to be talking more later, but one key aspect of Small Giant is to be continuously learning from our successes and our mistakes, and we certainly made a bunch of mistakes with Oddwings Escape. Then our second game was Rope Racers, which was this asynchronous multiplayer running game, and we did it almost to prove to ourselves that we can actually get the game out very quickly, and pretty much all the KPIs were better than with Oddwings Escape, and that game paid its development costs back, but I still wouldn't call it a success either. And then of course Empires and Puzzles, which is this free-to-play RPG game with has this cool and unique combination of base building, hero collection, and match 3 battles, and that game of course has been extremely successful. So by the time we launched Empires and Puzzles, the team size had grown from 5 people to about 12 people, and then driven by the success of Empires and Puzzles, we've grown the team all the way to about 70 people. So it's been an interesting growth path and experience, and certainly I think we've had to make a conscious effort in trying to keep make sure that the culture remains like we want it to be. And
if we continue from that, I mean, do you? You said learning both from the successes and the failures. It's quite common, people talking around having a culture where failure is accepted. You always learn from it. I like the fact that you said also learning from the successes. How did you? I'm trying to find the right word. How did you say make this a system? Like a continuous practice. Do you see what I mean?
I think it's like partially it's about like basically you have to, like when you implement, like you spend, let's say, 2 years creating a game and the game is not successful, you kind of have to look yourself in the mirror and understand that it's clear that something did not go right, so you have to figure out what were the mistakes that you made, and we took those learnings to Rope Racers and then to Empires and Puzzles. So I think it's mostly about kind of like self-reflection, I would say.
All right. What kind of cadence would you say that you were using at Small Giant for this? I guess the most seldom would be kind of a post-mortem in the end of, well, I guess it's very hard to define an end, right, to a game like that. But I think it's
we certainly like what we try to do throughout our work is identify these things as they happen, so to speak. So let's say we're developing something and somebody starts to feel like, okay, this might no longer be the best way of doing things, as say the team size has grown or we've learned more, and we decide to, they would bring it up, we would have a discussion and agree how could we do better. So I think this initially, at least, this happened pretty naturally throughout the work. But of course, if this doesn't happen frequently, for example, when we started a new game team, we actually introduced retrospectives specifically for this purpose, so to get the discussion going. And of course, as you said, but at least at the end of a project, you would have a postmortem to kind of make sure we are in agreement on what were the learnings and how are we going to apply them in the future.
All right, cool. Let's continue with. I'm eager to hear more learnings around how to build a great culture.
So you were kind of asking me what's the how do I see culture, and to me it's all about actions. So what do you as a leader and the other people in your company do in practice? And what I mean by that is that culture is a reflection of the values of the company, but it's very easy to say that you have some lofty value in your company, but it's a bit harder to actually uphold those values through your own actions. So of course all companies have culture, but I think in many companies that culture isn't necessarily intentional, or it doesn't reflect the values they might put on their website or a PowerPoint presentation.
It's an interesting point there with intentional. I mean, how I mean, in this case of Small Giant, how much would you say were, let's say, very intentional culture, and how much would you say were unintentional? And I'm also guessing, there's that zone where it was maybe not intentional, but you recognize that this is something worth kind of preserving and building upon, so we're now making it intentional. Maybe we can call that emergent.
I would say that a lot of I'm a big believer in culture, and this comes back down to like the learnings I had from Sulake, especially on the ways that like Sulake was doing a lot of things right, but there were a lot of mistakes that were being made, and I kind of did not want to repeat those mistakes. So I would say that a lot of the Small Giant culture is actually intentional, but of course it's not just one person. It's more like when you start with a small group, you make sure that they are at least in agreement on what we want to build, and then as you hire more people, like let's say who are of course you should hire for diversity, but at the same time still like-minded people who fit in that culture, you kind of take it, like grow it from there.
When it comes to intentional, do you have any, was there like in a specific examples or practices that you can share? I mean, you kind of already gave one, which is to be very intentional in how you hire, but are there also the other examples of practices that you would recommend to someone building a studio today?
Yeah, I actually have like a number of these things, kind of like aspects that define the culture of Small Giant, and I thought I could discuss some of them with you today, and I could start like, of course, these are not necessarily from the perspective of like, let's say you're starting a new company. Of course, your needs may be different depending on what you're building and what kind of team do you have, but clearly the things that we've done at Small Giant have been successful and have worked out for us. So I could approach it more from the perspective of like, what are the things that we value in our culture. And the first one that I want to highlight is focusing on the essential. So we've always been a very small company, and probably that applies to let's say most startups. So you have to be very thoughtful on where you put your effort in, and so it means that we've been saying no to a lot of things, even the things that have been very, very tempting, but just like trying to keep the focus. And it's also about deciding when something is good enough, because there's the saying that perfect is the enemy of good, and I completely believe that. But of course, things can be iterated later as needed. And it's just about getting things done. So less talking and more doing. For example, we're very mindful of spending as little time in meetings as possible. So if there's a meeting, it should have a clear agenda. It should be as short as possible. And most importantly, the people who are participating should actually want to participate.
Cool. Any more from that list?
Sure. Yeah.
You're triggering my curiosity there when you said you have a list and you share some of it.
Yeah. So the other aspect that is important for Small Giant is trusting the team, because the team members are the experts. So the decisions should be made by them and not the managers. And I always like to say that the people at Small Giant have great power and great responsibility. So we try to avoid any kind of hierarchy or bureaucracy. So you of course do need some processes to support the work, but those processes should be very lightweight, and they should never get in the way of actually getting things done.
So when it comes, I liked what you say there with great responsibility. Have that ever been, a challenge? Because it's one of those things where I think most people will say, yeah, I want to have more, but of course in some cases, you can have. It can also be scary, right?
Yeah, I think it's it again comes down to hiring a bit. So you need to hire people who you can trust, but I think the other aspect is this, and I think this is also part of our part of our culture, like kind of this talking, like we call it sparring, but basically talking with your colleague. Like it's not so much about asking for permission, but more about identifying that, hey, this thing that I'm now working on, this decision that I'm trying to make is very risky or can have big consequences. And then talking with your colleague about it to get a second opinion. And I think this is something that we've really tried to promote in the company and get the people talking. And usually that actually results in, or like gets us much better results. And I actually don't think, or I can't think of cases that we would have encountered where giving this responsibility to people would have felt like a mistake, or we haven't had this any kind of like abuse of power. People are generally like, when you give them responsibility, they also take it seriously.
But the tip that you said there, do I understand it right? So it's almost like you always want to do a bit of a peer review, or let's call it, have a second opinion on things, and you actually make that a value or maybe a practice. Is that do I understand it correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So of course, coming from a software development background, one aspect that of course many other companies do, but we certainly found very helpful is the code review process. So somebody is developing a piece of software. Most of our developers are actually developing, if they develop a feature, they develop it mostly by themselves, but they first have, like when they start to implement it, they of course have a plan, like how they're going to approach it. They talk with somebody, like kind of almost like a bullet point idea, like this is how I'm planning to approach it, approach the implementation, and they get feedback, and then they get to work, and then when they are done, they do a pull request. Somebody does a code review. So there's always at least two people kind of looking at the code, and also of course the initial design, to avoid the situation where a lot of the work would have to be thrown away if the original approach was not the right one. So we apply that for software development, but of course you can do the same thing for anything else, like say you're writing a message to the community about an incident that we have had in the game, or thinking about how let's say the people ops is announcing something to the company and things like that. Always having at least two people involved in it. Of course, first person starts with something, but then the other person usually gives a very insightful feedback, and the end result tends to be better.
I think that's a very good tip. You mentioned a few times the importance of recruiting the right people. How what kind of strategy did you apply to find the people to build a company?
We were, of course, in an interesting position as a small company, kind of here in Finland, among the juggernauts like Rovio and Supercell. So we had to be a little bit creative on that front. So I started out hiring a couple of senior people that I already knew were like really good, but then we actually focused a lot on hiring more like junior employees, and this has turned out to be a very, very good strategy for us. So many of the people who joined us as juniors are now in a very senior roles and are actually helping to hire more junior people. So it's kind of this positive cycle.
How did you find them? Recruiters, advertising. What was your method of finding all the junior talent that then grew to become senior?
Yeah, I think it is easier to find junior talent than senior talent. So in that sense, I think it was we never felt like it was very difficult to find potential candidates. Initially, we were using just like LinkedIn advertising and did the whole process ourselves. Later, we've been using like a third party for sourcing. But of course, we are still doing the interviews ourselves, and I think we've been very successful at hiring people, and I think a key part of that is asking the right questions during the interview, and not settling for just an okay candidate.
So it sounded like you had a nice kind of succession going on there with those junior that became senior and now hiring the new juniors. Did you have, or do you have like a special kind of like succession program, beyond the onboarding, or is that, let's say, more organic?
I think I would say that it's more organic, but at the same time, this is one of those things that I noticed at Sulake. We had a lot of senior people, and we never had this junior pipeline in the company, which I think worked out well initially, because of course senior people are more experienced, but in the long term you start to have this a little bit like a stagnation. Everybody's certainly not getting younger, and having these more junior people in the team, I think they bring this certain amount of energy and enthusiasm that I think is very positive for the team. So getting this positive cycle going on was definitely intentional, and of course it does have benefits also from like succession planning perspective.
I want to make sure that we cover one topic that also comes up quite often on this podcast, which is how to handle growth pain. You're starting out, you're getting 10 people, 20 people, and as you grow and become more people, there are challenges that comes in there. I mean, what were the challenges that you bumped up against as you were growing the team, and how did you solve that?
Yeah, of course, when you're growing from 5 people to 13, then to 30 and 70, there are like the company can potentially change quite a bit, and there are like some of the challenges are like communication challenges, especially between the teams. But then there's it, like, let's say the first challenge is simply like when you have a small company, everybody knows everybody, and then when you start to have more people, it becomes, there's a risk that it starts to feel less like a community. and that's, for example, one of those things where we really try to make sure that people have a reason and means to connect with their colleagues. But the other part from our perspective is just also like we've always taken a very careful approach to hiring. So we hire only when there's a real need. So you kind of should you should feel a little bit of a pain before you do the hire. And again, like no settling. So really trying to keep the bar very high. So the benefit of this is that you kind of grow, even though the total growth in numbers is big, but you do it gradually. So the new people have time to like digest the culture, and at the same time you can provide them with the support that they need to basically be set up for success. And of course, like as you grow, just trying to keep the culture in mind. So how to retain what made us successful in the first place.
Is there anything more that you think we need to make sure that we don't miss out when we're sharing these tips around how to build a strong culture for success?
Sure. Like we covered a couple of things. If we have time, I could highlight a couple of more.
The final rundown thing. I mean, at TV shows, I think they do like they call like the 5 fast ones or things like that.
Sure. All right. So very briefly, like transparency is super important for us. Like, because the team members are making those decisions, they should know the full context effect that could be affecting those decisions. So we try to give people as much visibility into how things are going in the company as possible. And part of the transparency is just being honest and straightforward. So meaning what you say and not shying away from this challenge, like difficult discussions, which actually takes you also to the hiring part and line management. So when you've hired a person, you can only know so much about them during that process. So when they join, just making sure that they get the feedback on if there are any issues, they should get the feedback on how to improve and doing follow through. So having those tough discussions. And then we kind of touched this already, but I'll simply briefly mention, like, we are big believers in continuous improvement. So you should always try to be a little bit better at what you do, and to learn things, you should be able to experiment, and to do that, people should have this sense of psychological safety. So not to be afraid of speaking up or trying new things, because sometimes when you are trying out new things, you are going to fail. And while we don't necessarily celebrate failures, we see them as a great opportunity for learning. And then finally, healthy work-life balance. So people at Small Giant do 40 hours per week, and then they go home to relax and have hobbies and spend time with their family. So we don't do crunching, which is pretty rare on the game industry. And of course, there are some rare cases where there's a problem in the live game, for example, and you need to stay a little bit longer to fix them. But then we make sure that you get the fair compensation for that work. So that's like as a quick rundown of the other things that I wanted to highlight.
No, but that's great, and I think again, work-life balance in general, Scandinavian companies are relatively good at, while at the same time, as you're saying, the industry as a whole is definitely having a bit of a struggle with it. But I for sure, I mean, we've both been in the industry for quite a while, and I think it's gotten better. I think it used to be worse.
Yeah, I agree.
So with that said, super thanks for hosting. These chats are, they feel like they're 5 minutes, even though they are half an hour. I think there was a lot of concrete stuff to take away there for everyone. So big thanks for joining, and I hope we continue the conversation in the future.
No worries. It was a pleasure.
and to all of you listening, if you like this, you know what to do. Share it so other can take part, and like and tune in to our next podcast. See you. I hope you enjoyed that interview. I certainly did. If you want to elevate yourself as a modern leader and help your teams become even more successful, then check out Favro Academy at favro.com. There you will find podcasts, webinars, articles, all free of charge. Check it out.